Hello and welcome to The Perfect Storm. I'm Robert Kecseg to host the show and glad to be back with you. Thanks for watching. Today we're going to cover our first topic, as I've gone over in the past, to talk about an issue that politicians never discuss. That's going to be our first item. We're going to talk about University of Texas a little bit today. And then we're going to talk about the stock market again and give you an update on what's taking place there. Lots to talk about there. And then next week, I am going to talk about this IRS scandal. It's too much for me to leave off of the plate, so we'll shoot to have a show ready for you next Wednesday to discuss that. So starting off at the Perfect Storm with University of Texas Board of Regents. The regents are basically trustees that have a fiduciary responsibility to oversee how the university is administered, and kind of like a board of directors you would have for a corporation. And one of those board of regents is a fellow by the name of Wallace Hall. He's made quite a bit of news recently, and it all started because he came across a couple of emails that were related to state reps that had written letters of recommendation specifically for particular students to be admitted to University of Texas. Some of them were to the undergraduate program, the major part of the university, and some were to the UT Law School. And after further review, Regent Wallace Hall thought there were some unseemly things taking place here, that there were many state representatives and state senators who were asking for really special treatment because of their position for kids who couldn't get into through the admissions process on their own to be helped along by these letters. And the irony of this is the person who's being attacked and prosecuted in all of this officially is Wallace Hall. Wallace Hall finds himself to be a victim of prosecution. The state legislature is trying to move to vote towards an impeachment process to remove Mr. Hall as a regent. So I found this story to be incredible. I don't think we hear our reps talk about these kinds of things enough. I understand that Bill Zedler in his show mentioned this the other day. He's obviously moved by it, and I can't say enough for my respect of Bill, who does his show weekly here. So let me just bring up a couple of points that I think are really interesting about this. First of all, when these letters were sent for these prospective students to get looked at by these reps, by these state reps and state senators, they were sent directly to the president of the university, Bill Powers. And just by that notion alone, I see that as a really terrible, terrible policy, how you would just completely bypass the normal applications process. And the first thing that comes to mind to me, why I want to make an issue of this and talk about it on Perfect Storm, is because the first thing that comes to mind is what happens to the kids who are working hard and barely making it to reach that level of being accepted at a great school like UT. It's those kids that are getting pushed out because someone else gains favor that they knew they couldn't qualify. Otherwise, why were you doing this? Well, why would you go through this process? Why wouldn't you just apply like everybody else and go through the normal process and stand next to or stand in line with others? So, and by the way, I want to mention, obviously, here at WBTM, we're pretty conservative and believe in free markets and people being personally responsible. I think that's probably the overall general big picture of the people that come down here and spend their time discussing these things. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue at all, and it's taking place from both sides, all the way to the Speaker of the House of the state of Texas, Joe Strauss. Strauss wrote a number of letters for a number of different individuals to give them a boost into UT. So I just want to give you a couple of the stats. The University of Texas reviewed between the years 2009 and 2013, there were 80 recommendation letters sent over the 4-year period. Of those 80 letters, 63 were for undergraduate school. Of the 63 people who had a letter sent on their behalf by these lawmakers, 37 of those, or 58%, were accepted to the university. This is far and away greater than the normal acceptance rate. The normal acceptance rate is around 23% of all the kids who apply at the university. So obviously it was a fast lane way, and they were being accepted at a much, much, much greater rate. How about UT Law School? Now this is even more critical, because think of the kind of effort of how many students have made to try to bring themselves to the level of being qualified to get into UT Law School. You know, there's a lot of effort being made by a lot of students. All of us who went to college knew people who were trying to go to law school, trying to go to medical school, trying to get the best grades they possibly could in undergraduate school to try to make it there. And so this is really, to me, this is really disgusting. There were 16 letters written for students over those 4 years for UT Law School, and 8 of them were accepted. Now, how about the aftermath of this? You know, when you think about it, so what were the results? So you allow people to be able to go and skip the line, or not even stand in line, skip the line, go to the front of the line and get accepted at a phenomenal rate compared to the typical applicant to UT in general. And so now they get to go to the university, they get to go to the law school. They shouldn't have been able to go. And what's the results? Well, here's some results from three different state reps. Judith Saffarini is a senator from Laredo. John Corona was a senator from Dallas, and Jim Pitts, who was a state rep, I believe, in the Ellis County area. Of the 3 people that they sent letters in to be approved and were accepted into the UT Law School, they took the bar of those 3 students. They took the bar 10 times before 2 of those 3 passed the bar. 10 attempts to pass. And yes, all 3 of those were sons of those reps. Jeff Corona from John Corona, Carlos Zaffarini from Judith Zaffarini, and I don't have the first name for Jim Pitts' son, but it was Jim Pitts' son. Apparently Jeff Corona passed the bar, and Carlos Zaffarini passed the bar in the course of those 10 attempts. And Mr. Pitts' son is still trying. So I think it's something that should be talked about. I think it's something that should be publicized. I think that this is the exact kind of thing that we want to eliminate. So what is the University of Texas doing about this? I found this in this piece from the Texas Tribune, where the chancellor is saying that they're going to dive deeper and commission a full external investigation. But the worst part of this story is that people like President Powers, president of the university, he emphasized that the system had looked at the issue thoroughly and found no wrongdoing. Well, he's the one who's receiving these what do you want to call them, letters of recommendation, letters of having political clout, that these people are supposed to get some sort of special benefit. He sees no problem with it. So now he's on the record. This is a quote from him, that they found that the situation was looked into thoroughly and found no wrongdoing. Well, of course he found no wrongdoing, because it's him doing it. It's him, the one that says, checks off and says, there's Zaffarini's kid. Make sure they get put through. There's John Corona's kid. And when you think about it, think about the favors that these people can get personally, the personal benefits they can get from this. It just reeks with corruption. It's the worst kind of thing. So if we think that we only see this type of stuff happening in Washington, that's why I'm trying to emphasize focusing on Austin, because we have a chance to be able to change a government that's closer to us. So here's a horrible thing that's taking place. I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't be fretting about it, why we shouldn't be publicizing about it, why we shouldn't be talking to our representatives, why we shouldn't be putting pressure to get rid of this kind of corruption wherever we find it. It doesn't matter where we find it. I was going to say, just today in Austin, there was supposed to be a hearing taking place where the Texas Ethics Commission is going after Michael Quinn Sullivan and his group, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. Why? Because they dared create a system of rating votes by your senators and your representatives. And when you think about it, in the last legislative session, there were over 5,000 bills that were trying to make its way through the legislature. As a citizen, how could you possibly, with you doing your work, taking care of your children, having your social time, whatever you're doing with your life, how could you possibly not be full-time on 5,200 bills in Austin? So you have an organization like Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. I'm not just saying them. There's many other good organizations out there. There's the Texas Right to Life group. There's the Young Conservatives, a lot of great groups. But all of them created a scorecard to rate these legislators. And what happens to the people who raise their voice and say, look at how these people voted? They get attacked by the Texas Ethics Commission. I mean, you can't really make this stuff up. That it's the Ethics Commission that goes after somebody who's trying to show what someone's record is. Because again, how is the public going to know? How is the public going to even keep track of even 70 issues that might have been voted on? And and all the background information from these groups is there for you to look for yourself. So anyway, there was a hearing where they were attacking Michael Quinn Sullivan and his group today in Austin. I wasn't able to check and see how things went with that. I'm sure it's a very preliminary hearing, but it's been something that's going on for a while. And then also think about the cost. Think about the cost to Wallace Hall. Wallace Hall is facing impeachment from the UT Board of Regents because he found something that seemed to be corrupt in the admissions process. And like I said, I gave you some of the stats of the results where there's an overwhelming amount of these young people getting approved by one person, by Bill Powers, who's the president of the university. Then we don't need an admissions process, Mr. Powers. We don't need to have anybody working at admissions. Just get rid of those people and just have everybody send their admissions to you. And then you can just choose exactly who you want to come to the university. Of course, you've thoroughly examined it because whatever you do is correct. It's just preposterous. And I think as citizens, we shouldn't stand for it. Let me get one more point here. Yeah, I wanted to say something about a representative, give him credit. Mr. Simpson, I believe he's from Longview, is among those prominent defenders of Hall and critics of the impeachment proceedings in the legislature. He wrote a letter for a student in the end of 2011. It was his first year as a legislator. And he described the applicant as a wonderful, well-rounded person from a great family with Texas Longhorn tradition through and through. And but his comment is that we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If somebody wants to make and use a representative as a reference, as somebody that they know, that's fine. References for application. And so he was making the point, Mr. Simpson, from representative from Longview, was saying that there is a place for references. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there's not a place for granting someone admission that's not qualified. and there's a quid pro quo system where you vote for my appropriation or my bill, and it'll help your constituent. That's not right. And so Simpson said he supports Hall's line of inquiry, and his comment was the biggest issue to me is we need to ask more questions, not less. So why don't we give Representative Simpson some congratulation for his approach to it, and he was somebody who did recommend somebody. So it doesn't mean just because everyone who's recommended is something that should be thrown in the garbage. I think the obvious solution to this is not have the president of the university making the decision to accept people or not and pass it through his hands so he can put his little check mark on it and give somebody a push through. I think that's the obvious problem. And of course, Speaker Strauss was a prolific writer. I believe he was, there were 5 examples of him pushing people through. He's referring to the Regent's examination of this as a witch hunt, which is amazing to me. The person who finds some suspicious activity is the person who should be burned at the stake like a witch, I guess. It's just... to me, it's just completely backwards. And of course, we see some of this very same thing going on in Washington. So anyways, I thought this was probably the most interesting issue I found recently that relates to the statewide issue here. So let me just reiterate, this is WBTM, We Become the Media TV, coming to you from Arlington, Texas. And this whole idea of doing this broadcast was started out of ideas that came out of the Arlington Tea Party. So we should thank the people behind the Arlington Tea Party who got this started. And let me just reiterate one more statistic here for you. The 50% admission rate into the law school compares to a 22.5% acceptance rate in the law school for everybody else. That is all those poor kids who didn't have a state rep writing a letter for them. That's the difference and how out of line this was. It was one other note that I had here I wanted to share with you to show you how crazy this is. So why don't we go on to the next general area. As many of you know, I have my own firm in the brokerage business, a registered investment advisor called Las Colinas Capital Management. I've been at it for about 31 years, and I'm kind of going through, all of us are going through probably one of the most interesting or spectacular periods for the stock market that I've seen in 32 years, and it mainly has to do with the Federal Reserve. And I was going to have on as a guest a retired Federal Reserve economist, and I wasn't able to arrange it. He's still on board. We're going to have him on in a few weeks probably. There was something that came up. He had some personal issues he had to take care of, and so we were going to have him on today, so we had to push that off. But I wanted to, I feel that the Fed is having an overwhelming role in what's happening in the stock market, and I don't think you can really talk about the stock market or talk about investing without mentioning the Federal Reserve. Just this last week, the Federal Reserve had their regular meeting, and out they came with their pronouncement that that they're going to continue purchasing securities. They're just going to do $10 billion less this next month than they have in previous months. So let me just go over this a minute. They have been printing money at the rate in 2013 of $85 billion a month. So that's about $1 trillion of new printed money in 2013. And this is what's really kind of forced the market higher regardless of what takes place economically, or really how businesses are really performing. And since the first of this year, they started on a trek of starting to slowly reduce that, of which people on Wall Street call it the taper. They're pulling back on the amount that they purchase each month. So for the first 3 months of the year, the first quarter, they printed $205 billion, which would be an $800 billion a year rate. So instead of $1 trillion, they were running at a $800 billion rate. We're now finishing up the second quarter of the year, April, May, June, and with the reduction over those 3 months, instead of $200 billion, they printed $145 billion. So now we're running at a $570 billion annual clip in the second quarter compared to $1 trillion last year. So they're printing half. But here's the rub. Here's the point that we're at. The first quarter of 2014, gross domestic product, that's the amount of goods and services that the economy is producing. Think about it, how is the economy humming along? And it's a very important figure. It's something you can compare our country to other countries. And for the first quarter of this year, the last and final adjustments were made to the data as the government collects the data. And it came in just today, so it's right off the press, that the economy contracted in the first quarter by 2.9%. So you say, Bob, well, what is 2.9%? It doesn't mean anything to me. For all of last year, the economy grew at about 2.5% for the entire year. Now it contracted at an annual rate of minus 2.9%. That's the greatest contraction or slowdown in the economy since this whole thing started in the first quarter of 2009. In 2009, the contraction was over 5%. It was gargantuan in size. So 2.9% is incredibly large. So after printing $1 trillion last year, that was supposed to make things better. What I'm saying is it's a terrible contrast to see that the first quarter of this year actually contracted by 2.9%. It's really sensational stuff. And so you wonder, what really is the solution? And of course, my solution is the Fed needs to get out of the way. We need to have a recession. We need to have things truly slow down so that things can really repair. And they're really propping things up by doing all this money printing. The aspect of the market that I wanted to mention that also happened, a really great thing happened, is that I've been advocating gold and silver for some time, and a way to do that in the stock market is through the gold and silver miners. And the gold and silver miners abruptly rallied right after the Federal Reserve made their press release last week. I think that was a pretty momentous shift, because the reason why precious metals would tend to go up is as a result of so much money being printed. Because the more money that's printed, the less value you have in the U.S. dollar. It damages the value of our currency. And of course, we see it in prices when we go to the supermarket. So that type of reaction is to be expected, and that's something that we did see. So eventually, I believe we will see the market clear this up and will overcome kind of the impediments of the Fed. That's why it'd be great to talk to one of their former economists about it. Anyway, the Fed did agree to reduce their printing at this recent meeting to $35 billion. So if they go again for this next quarter, the July, August, September quarter, or the third quarter of the year, they'll be running at a $85 billion 3-month mark, which is around $340 billion for the whole year if they were at that pace. So now you're talking about them printing a third of what they printed last year. So that's what's taken place in the stock market. It's really pretty incredible stuff. Why don't we put up that chart? The one with the junk bonds. Let's see. Yeah, that one. All right, so Josh just put up this chart for us to look at, and I wanted you to look at the boxes. Could you just show those little, see these little dotted boxes at the bottom? Oh, you can't. Okay. But anyway, if you look at the red line at its low in around that first dotted box, that shows the impact that the Federal Reserve has in pushing interest rates lower. And when they push those rates down, the blue line is the stock market itself, and it shoots the market up. So that's really the impact that they have by forcing rates down to really low rates. Eventually, those rates start to rise, and down comes the market. So then you see that long period in the middle of that chart that runs from around 2004, 2005, 2007, and you see again where rates were forced down to an extremely low level. You see the blue line then escalating up and showing that the stock market responds upwardly until it's so high that, again, the red line starts to accelerate and interest rates go up, and down comes the stock market crashing in 08, 09. So the point is, if you go all the way to the right-hand corner of this chart and look at the red line, you can see that the junk bond market has been forced to new lows. This is as low as it's ever been after all of this manipulation, massive manipulation by the Federal Reserve. So they force those rates down, which forces the stock market up, and you see the blue line accelerating, almost going straight up now in the stock market. And so what comes next? Eventually rates start to rise, and down comes the blue line. So that's what's likely to happen. Now, I'm not saying that happens this week, next month, but somewhere in the foreseeable future, I would say, I would hazard a guess that we're talking about at least in the next 12 to 24 months. So that's an idea of the impact that the Federal Reserve has had. We've already seen this whole picture before, and it keeps repeating itself. It's just that when it happens and the rates start to go up, it happens rather suddenly, and of course stock prices go down. I was going to play a little clip for you from one of my favorite guys to listen to is a guy by the name of Mark Faber. He's an economist. He's actually Swiss, and he's a really kind of a funny guy with his Swiss, sounds kind of like a German accent, discussing this. He gives a kind of a brief interview here, so that's why I wanted to play it for you. Let's listen to Mark Faber do this interview. This just took place last week.
At this point that maybe the Fed is doing something right here.
No, I think it's a catastrophe. What the Fed has done is to lift asset prices and the cost of living. In the meantime, as the cost of living increases are higher than the wage increases, the typical American household income is going down in real terms. So the Fed is boosting asset prices. It leads to less affordability. People can't buy their homes anymore in the lower income group, except, of course, the well-to-do people. They can buy homes because the asset prices have gone up and they own the assets and not the 50% of the U.S. population that are in the lower income group. And so the more they print, the more inequality there is, the weaker the economy will become, in my view, and that will necessitate actually the Fed to print even more money, because as you just said before, the oil price is going up, and maybe that will lead the Fed to say, okay, we're not going to taper as much as we wanted to, we're going to ease. And so inflation over time will accelerate and diminish the standard of living of the average American household.
Mark, you're not the first person now to say that you think the Fed is going to have to change course and potentially increase the stimulus again. Peter Schiff has often said that on the show the last few times that we've had him on as well. When you look at the Fed and you look at the timeline, how much longer can the taper plan go on while the economy and the markets sort of stay
I think we got some really good help there from Mark Faber. You notice he used the word inequality. And this is the really crucial thing. If we didn't have this intervention into the stock market, we wouldn't have that kind of inequality. Everyone would be standing on their own. But instead, the Fed is printing this money. I just gave you massive amounts of money. $1 trillion last year. The first quarter, $200 billion. The second quarter is going to be $145 billion. The third quarter is still going to be at least $85 billion at the rate that they're reducing the amount that they're printing. When you take those first 3 quarters, that's about $550 billion in the first 3 quarters of this year, compared to $1 trillion last year. So even though they've slowed down and they've done it gradually, this printing, we still had this horrendous GDP report that I already went over at length of a contraction or slowdown of the amount of goods that we're producing as an economy of 2.9%, which is a very, very large slowdown. This is not a minor slowdown. And today we see in the stock market, again, because of the Federal Reserve's activities, in a day where today that news came out at the beginning of the market day, and what happened to the market? The Dow was up again, the NASDAQ was up, the S&P was up. All of these are up because the Fed money that they're printing is sloshing around. It's sloshing around and pushing up stocks and pushing up the value of bonds and driving yields down. So, as he said, the consequence of that turns out to end up being in prices. And it isn't something that everybody sees. It's not very easy to explain inflation, but eventually it comes out in what we call inflation, which ends up, inflation is the cause, the result is rising prices. The inflation is printing all these dollars and inflating the amount of dollars that are in existence, reduces the value of each dollar, which causes prices to be higher. And of course, the average person, everybody has to have food and they have to have energy. They have to have heating and cooling, depending on whatever season. They have to have transportation energy to be able to move to work, to be able to do anything. And to move in our society, you have to use energy. And of course, you have to have food. And so those two things are rising readily. They're much up more and more. When someone asked the Fed chair, which is now a woman, Janet Yellen, about the inflation, about rising prices, Janet Yellen responded that this was just noise in the market. Well, you don't print, Miss Yellen, or Fed economists out there, you don't print $1 trillion in a year and not create some inflation. You can't add that much to the marketplace and not have some sort of consequence. And that's what Mark Faber's talking about. Mark Faber I think is a great economist. I think he explains it very well. He gives a lot of interviews. If you want to get an idea, go to YouTube and put in Mark Faber. He like I say, he really knows how to explain. The other thing that's incredible that I should mention is the kind of distortion that the Fed is creating in just the bond market alone. U.S. Treasury rates, or the rate that government is borrowing money in the United States, is at 2.6%. There's no way that anyone would argue with me that the creditworthiness of a country like Spain today or France today in Europe would have a credit rating better than the United States. It's just, no one's going to try to make that point. But the interesting thing is that the cost of borrowing in France for their 10-year debt is 1.66%, and ours in the United States is 2.6. To be that much lower, almost half the cost in France, is completely out of line. It's a complete distortion. Why is that? Because of the support that's been made by the central bank in Europe has been even greater than this printing that's been taking place in the United States. So if you think it's just the United States, it's not. In this particular time that we live in, what makes it so unique is that this is taking place everywhere, in all the major economies of the world, all the major economies of the world: Japan, Europe, the United States, China, and the developed parts of Asia. So really, the only part that isn't developed would be Africa and other various and sundry small countries around the world. So the whole developed world is going through this same kind of intervention, the same kind of distortion. I mean, for the rate of Spain, or for the interest rate that Spain borrows money, Spain has a 26% 6% unemployment rate today as we speak. People have rioted in the streets. People want to secede. There are states within Spain, Catalonia and other places, not being intimately familiar with the country, but there are separate states within Spain. Catalonia wants to separate. They want to get away from this government that is ruining their economy. This is the kind of thing, what I'm talking about, this is the type of activity, the kind of intervention that these central banks are doing around the world that causes people to take to the streets. That's why we've seen this in other countries. It started in Greece and it moved on. So this is a very, very trying time. This is a very, very difficult time, and it's this type of consequence that you're going to have to be preparing yourself for higher prices. That's why my general thing to mention on this show is to do your best to try to either reduce your debt or try to get out of debt. That's probably the best advice anybody can give you right now in general. So, see, Josh, did you have something else you wanted to talk about?
Well, the only question, hi folks, I'm Josh, I'm the producer, I'm president of the Arlington Tea Party. The only question, I guess, just to recap, as far as Wallace Hall, being on the Board of Regents, that's an oversight position, is that right?
Yeah, as I described it, think about it like a board of directors. Board of directors looks over the shoulder of the CEO, CFO, the officers of the company. Those officers report to that board of directors. So the same thing here. The president of the university, the chancellor of the university, the officers of the university would be reporting to this board of regents. Exactly.
And so he's doing his job. He's holding, basically just asking the questions. Hey, wait a second here. I see some fishy business going on over here. Can I get some answers? And by just even asking the question, he's being targeted.
Right, and to think that our legislature, that's why I brought it up, that the answer to his inquiry by the state legislature, by the Speaker of the House, Joe Strauss, is to take one of his committees, whichever one is applicable, and have that congressional committee bring impeachment. They're voting to bring impeachment proceedings against Mr. Hall, as if he has done something wrong when his responsibility, as Josh was saying, is to provide oversight, to sit as a regent on the University of Texas Board of Regents.
So this is like, it seems to me it's almost affirmative action for political families. Your son or daughter may not be making the grade, but because they're connected, then they deserve to get in. And don't you dare hold them accountable. Don't you dare ask any questions whenever you see impropriety taking place.
Yeah, and that's why I mentioned the situation with Michael Quinn Sullivan, just because it was timely today and that first hearing was taking place, that the same thing was going on. The Texas Ethics Commission is coming down on basically an action of free speech. As you've done with the Arlington Tea Party and other groups, you want to form a group and you want to get people together to discuss things, and you want to have speakers come by and talk, or you want to raise money or whatever, is perfectly fine, because we're supposed to live in a free country.
Right.
But instead, these different actions of criticism come under attack to where they want to prosecute you. It seems to be, we're starting to see the same thing occur now, over and over and over again. And I think that's the reason why we need to raise it, and more people need to hear about it. I doubt that very many people would know about Regent Hall and what he's going through. And I can't think of any other side to take than Wallace Hall's position. I don't. How could you take the other side?
Well, he's doing the same thing with his responsibility in that position that the Tea Party is doing with our state, local, and federal government. One of the principles of the Tea Party is that we demand accountability from our elected officials, And look how we have been targeted almost in the same way as a group that Wallace Hall's being targeted, demonized, slandered against.
Sure.
The other thing I wanted to take a look at here, Bob, I'm over here producing the show and clicking the buttons and all that sort of stuff. But we had this chart, the junk bond yields near record lows.
Mm-hmm.
And I was taking a look while you were talking at the 2008, 2009 area. And the junk bonds skyrocket, and the stock market tanks.
Right.
And I look at just after 2000, I guess that's right, coming into 2008, it's almost, from 2000, it's like a record high almost, it looks like to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then we all felt the crash of the stock market there. And then I'm looking at where we are over here in 2014, and it looks like it's about a third, if not twice as high. Let's see, at 23, 24 points is about 18 points, it looks like there. So, I mean, we're significantly higher than we were even in 2007, 2008 era. The junk bonds are much lower than they were at that time. And I'm assuming that we're going to have another skyrocketing of the junk bonds, another crash of the stock market. And if I'm seeing this correctly, I'm not a finance guy, but if I'm seeing this correctly, the stock market's going to even have a worse crash than what we experienced in 2008.
Yeah, I think Josh, I think it's a great observation. And let me just reiterate that again. Josh was pointing out that you see the red line down there is lower than it's ever been, and that's going all the way back to 1997 in this chart. So it's got a number of years there. But why is the junk bond yield so low? It's because of the Federal Reserve. The money printing, the bonds that they're purchasing, it drives those interest rates down as they buy the bond, as they buy more and more bonds. Remember, I was giving you all those numbers. $1 trillion last year, $200 billion the first quarter of this year. It's going to be still $85 billion this quarter that we're in right now, July, August, September. All that money printing, all of that intervention, all of that interference with the market and not letting the market price those bonds on their own in the free market is driving that red line down so that you can't hardly get any rate. You can't hardly get a rate of return. To give you an idea, if you bought the U.S. Treasury bond, you'd get about a 2.6% yield. If you buy a junk bond, you get approximately a 5% yield. It should be 8, 9, 10% yield. That's where it should be. And so it's been driven down because of the government purchases, by the Federal Reserve's purchases of government bonds and mortgages, by the boatloads. These hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of bonds has been taking place now for over 5 years. On and off for 5 years they've been doing this. And so what has it done? Driven the yields down on those junk bonds that low, and you see two examples of what happens when the rate starts to pop up. When the rate starts to pop up high enough. Why is the rate pop up? Because they stop the buying, because they let the market go back to its normal level of equilibrium. Eventually, that's what happens. And so so this artificial creation of these excessively low rates goes back to just any kind of level of normalcy, down comes the market. So this is what people talk about bubbles. It's really a bond bubble that they've created. And when the bond bubble bursts, the rates go up. We come back to normal, but what comes to normal is the stock market, and the stock market will come down in big numbers.
So the government and the Federal Reserve are trying to fix the problem, and in doing so, they're creating a much, much bigger problem.
A much bigger problem. There is no way to my dying day would I ever go back off of the idea that this makes it worse. This makes the whole condition, and that's what really disturbs me more than anything. It makes it worse, and most people will never know what hit them. I would gather to say most people don't know what happened in the 08, 09 period. They don't know what happened in the dot-com bubble. Why did that happen? Then that all was created in 1996, 97 by the long-term capital management, which is off of this chart. They intervened then and created the dot-com bubble. And this last one was the housing bubble, and now we've got, I'll just call this one the bond bubble. I think that's probably a reasonable enough label to put on it. But it's spectacular, and that's why we put it up here in graphic form. Great thing that we have the video for you to be able to see it. And if anybody believes that that blue line of the stock market rising that spectacularly in that short of a period of time, if you think that's normal, then you just have to look at a little bit more history to understand that that's just not normal. So that's the conditions that we're in, and that's the issue that we face. I mean, we can't stop the Federal Reserve. I don't know how we do that. And then the other thing is, most of the financial press, when they ask her questions, or they ask Bernanke questions, her predecessor, they sit there as if these people are all knowing, as if Ben Bernanke just has all of the answers. Ben Bernanke, just to throw it up at him, when the crisis was unfolding even in 2006, and the subprime loans were going bad, and there were some savings and loans that had gone under, but it hadn't affected the stock market yet, so you didn't really know about it. When that was going on, Bernanke was out there saying, well, this whole thing is really only confined to subprime mortgages. Say that now, and remind Mr. Bernanke now, remind Chairwoman Yellen now, that that's what the Federal Reserve's voice said, that this was confined to subprime mortgages, when there's been 7 million foreclosures. That's a lot more than subprime. It's a much bigger problem than that. And if you continue to tune into our show here at WBTM, we'll have it up on YouTube for you to review and share with your friends. Spread it around so people can know that we're out here talking about things. We're trying to talk about things that aren't normally discussed in the news media. That's why we call it WBTM. We become the media, so you can get a different point of view. And like I said, next week, what I'm going to have on my show, Perfect Storm, I'm going to talk more in depth about this IRS scandal, and we'll see what else we come up with for next week. Anything else, Josh?
Well, I had a couple of questions. Maybe we can get to them next week. Are you ready to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I wanted to get you a couple of things. One, she lost the emails. I can't find the emails.
Oh.
How convenient. And then the other thing, which I think all of our viewers would appreciate hearing your perspective. I mean, we have this huge influx of children across our southern border. What economic effect is that going to have to us here in the U.S.?
Well, I think the most obvious thing about the influx is, the first thing that comes to mind to me is, I think about going on vacation to Los Cabos and go down there golfing and stay at a beautiful resort, and really a very beautiful place on the ocean. But when I come back and I'm ending my vacation, I go through, like everybody else, very deliberate, very close scrutiny with my identification. I've had them go through our luggage, go through our underwear to see what's in there. You go through the customs thing of not being able to bring in things and avoid the tax. Only so much liquor you can buy, and all these types of things, all these restrictions, all of the scrutiny as a citizen of the United States of America. Born in Chicago, Illinois, 1952. My parents were born here. My grandparents came here from Europe. That's how my family came here. But they came here through the normal immigration process. And that's the first thing that hits me, Josh, is that's the rules for the citizens of the country when you're returning back to the country. So anybody out there who's been out of the country, you know what I'm talking about. You've been through the same thing. And I don't mind it. I don't mind going through it. I've seen, we've had the drug-sniffing dogs, check the luggage and stuff. And usually the people are fairly easy to get along with. But we go through that kind of scrutiny as citizens. And then you flash forward to today, and people are sitting here defending the idea that anybody and everybody can just come into the country. ID, I doubt that there's a single person that has any identification on them whatsoever. When we moved from one state to the other, Josh, I don't know how much you've moved around the country, but I have a few times being in the service in the past. You get stopped at some of the state borders for plants or fruits. They don't want those brought because they have possibility of contaminating the crop in the other states. So they have this reason of doing this. I understand. Well, these people are coming in with diseases and everything else, no identification whatsoever. They're telling them that they have to show, I saw this the other day on Glenn Beck Show, they have to show up for a hearing, which of course, none of these people do, so that's all a farce. It's just ridiculous. The impact, I think, the consequence that I would say from an economic point of view that I don't think is being talked about enough, who's going to be impacted the most? The people that have been impacted the most are the lowest income Americans. The people at the lowest end of the of income that are trying to make a living. The people who are out there cutting grass. The people who are out there painting. People who are out there doing regular labor jobs. Those are the people who are going to be impacted the most, because you're bringing in all this competition of somebody who will work for just a sandwich, because we know they're coming from places that are pretty desperate. But that's always been the case. Our own ancestors came from, in many cases, pretty desperate situations. But to be coming in willy-nilly without any inspection, without any identification, without anything whatsoever, and then pretty much being set free into the country to do what you want, that's just a country that wants anarchy. If we want to have complete civil unrest, we want to have anarchy, we want to have people desperate in the streets to be able to make a living, to be able to feed their family, that's going to be the consequence. So it's kind of a long comment, but that's how I see it.
Well, it reminds me of what President Obama said about the capital gains tax. It's not about the income revenue to the government, it's about fairness.
Right.
And so maybe this is just another way for them to create fairness here in America and across North America.
Well, I was going to say, if you want to know what the limit is, the limit will be when the society falls apart. When enough people come in to where the entire society falls apart and you can't drive down the street, you can't stop at a stoplight. Think about it. If there's enough people desperate on the street and you're in the city or you're even in a busy suburb and you stop at a street and somebody wants something, they're going to come up and whack that car. They're going to try to get what they can. Mm-hmm. When people are desperate, they'll do desperate things. And the lawlessness, the ability, look at, when they say that the border patrol is overwhelmed at the border with the vast quantity that are just pouring in now. What is that? People say, well, how did these people decide to come? Well, the President of the United States and all of the minions on his side, from Nancy Pelosi to Harry Reid, have been talking about amnesty. They've been talking about letting all the people who are already here off the hook, no responsibility, and that has just been sending a clear message that just come here. Just come here. And we know that they've been advertising. It's already been reported that they've been advertising in Central America. I had heard before they were advertising in Mexico. So if you advertise to come here, what do you think people are going to do? They certainly knew from the time that my grandparents came in the early 1900s to today. They knew, or they believed they were going to a better place. They knew they had a much better chance from where they were, and they were willing to take that chance. But to do it unlawfully and have every illegal alien come in. So what are we going to have? Would you say there's 1 billion people out there that would like to come here? Is there maybe 1.5 billion? Maybe there's 2 billion people who would want to come here. It's just a spectacular thing. And again, that's one of those things that I don't think we hear enough from the political side opposing this president. I don't think we hear nearly enough to really make a difference.
And just some brief comments on the emails conveniently being lost. What if you would have lost your emails during an audit?
Yeah, I mean, they would just come into your office, and they would seize your computer. They would seize all of your files. They do it all the time. The IRS goes and seizes people's records all the time. I remember when the famous Tony Dorsett had some tax problems. You remember the former star running back for the Dallas Cowboys and University of Pittsburgh, and he had some problems with the IRS. He was behind, I guess, on his taxes. They came and changed the locks on his home.
Wow.
Changed the locks on his home. And Tex Schramm, helped him out, the general manager of the Cowboys and so forth. I just remember that being a story back in the 80s, and or maybe it was in the early 90s. I'm not exactly sure the time frame, but that really happened. And they didn't care whether he was Tony Dorsett or who he was. And this Mr. Koskinen, with his smug attitude, you remember how willing he was to comply, taking over as the commissioner. Now you see what a bureaucrat looks like. A bureaucrat only cares about the bureaucracy. They don't care about anything. They don't care about any kind of service, if you're happy with their service or not. And we're being run by a bureaucracy that's really driving the whole system into the ground. And I think the worst thing is people are going to lose respect for any kind of authority. And when people start losing respect for authority, that's when you have the chance for a lot of civil unrest in the streets. And that's probably the thing that I'm most concerned about is where this ends and how this radically changes our society. So we're ready to wrap it up. Thanks for watching The Perfect Storm. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to try to come up again with interesting things that you're not hearing about in the news as much. And hopefully you'll send out the YouTubes and send it to your friends. This is Robert Kecseg from The Perfect Storm at WBTM TV. We become the media. Thanks for watching.